The Advisor software allows you to define, add, remove, or modify data sources in your Advisor project at any point during the project build. In the software, a data source is a definition of input data that contains connection information on how to access the data, the table name and field names used in the Advisor software, the data types of the fields, and also the definition of the fields in terms of precision, use of commas, and use of a currency symbol. A list of the data sources that are currently being used in your project can be found in the project tree. At the bottom is the data sources node. And you can see that this project currently has one data source in use. Now, a data source can define multiple tables. So, for example, a data source could draw from 4 worksheets in a spreadsheet or 2 queries against a database, etc. In this case, there are 3 tables associated with this access data source, which happens to be an extract from an access database. Also, projects can have multiple data sources, and these data sources can be shared across projects. Now, there are 4 different places to define a data source using the data wizard. The first is to use a data wizard by itself, which can be accessed by going to the File menu and selecting New Data Source. Or you can also get to the data wizard from the Task menu by selecting Load New Data. Or you can also access it from the Project Workshop toolbar by selecting the Load a New Data Source icon. Defining a data source with the data wizard alone actually loads the data into the project. And at the end of the data load, you have the option to remember or save the data source. So then it could be used in subsequent sessions of new projects. The other 3 ways to access the data wizard to define a data source is via the data source template node, the Project Workshop toolbar, or the Manage Data Sources dialog. And these 3 ways do not actually load the data into the project. The data sources have to be added after you define them. Next, and then I can define the data table name and field names. Here I can change the data types, the precision, digits, currency, but I'm going to leave it as is. So next, and finish. And so now this data source has been added to my list of available data sources. And to add it to my project, I simply click on it and select Use under the task. And this will actually load the data into your project, and it will become available for immediate use. And so now this table will be listed under the tables node of the project tree. Now I can also add this data source using the Manage Data Sources dialog, which, as I mentioned earlier, it also allows you to define a data source. And to access this dialog, you can either go to the File menu and select Manage Data Sources, or from the Project Workshop toolbar by selecting Manage Existing Data Sources. And when the dialog opens, you'll have a list of data sources that are currently being used in your project. And below will be a list of the available data sources. So you can see here that demographic was added to this list as well. And if I wanted to add it from here, I would simply click on the data source name and click Add. Now, adding a data source via the Manage Data Sources dialog does not actually add the data from the data source into the project immediately. You would have to close this dialog box and save the project as an ADB and refresh the data. Now to define a data source from this dialog, I simply select New, and the data wizard will open, and I go through and load the file or table. Financial data, open, next. I'm going to leave it as is, next, next, and finish. And so now it's added. And so I can select it here, add, close, and then I need to go to File, Save as an EDV, save, and then I can refresh the data. So now the financial data table is available for use in your project, and it will be under the tables node in the project tree. And again, it will also be listed under the data source templates node. And so I could have added this financial data table from this interface as well. Now, the last place that you can create a new data source is from the Project Workshop toolbar by selecting Create a New Data Source Template. And again, the data wizard will open, and you follow the steps to load your new table or data source. Next, since I'm in Excel, I need to select the sheet that has the data. Next. And I'm just going to leave the fields in this table as is. So next, next, and finish. And so now you can see that the procedures data source is now listed under the data source templates node. So I could add this data source from this interface, or I could add it from the Manage Data Sources dialog. And there's one last place that you can add existing data sources, and that is from the Load from Previous Data Source interface, which you can access from the task menu under Load Data, the Load from Previous Data Source. You can also access this interface from the Project Workshop toolbar by selecting Use a Data Source Template to load one or more new tables. And lastly, from the File menu and selecting Load Previous Data Source. And so here you can load multiple data sources at a time, and you can also delete multiple data sources at a time. So I've already added financial data and demographics, so I'm just going to select procedures by clicking the box next to it, and I want to open it, so I select the open. And now this table will be loaded into my project and will be ready for use. And the data source editor opens for that data source that you selected. And here is where you can change location of the data or the attributes of the data source, such as the fields included and their properties. Here on the Connection tab is where you can change the location of the data source. So here's the current location of the data source. It's on my desktop. And so if I wanted to change this, I would move the data source to whichever folder I wanted. And then I would come here and click Browse and find where it's saved. So I want to put it in a folder on my desktop and select the data source and then click Open. And then you have to click Test to verify the connection. And so it's working. Click OK. And now this has enabled the Save and Save As template buttons. So if I would choose to save, this would overwrite the existing data source. If I chose Save as a template, this would create a new data source template that I could add in a later project or to this project. But I just want to save over the existing data source, so I click Save. And then I would have to close this Manage Data Sources and refresh the data. So you can also, like I said, edit the field names, the fields that are included, etc. Again, by opening the data source editor, but this time going to the metadata tab. And so here you can see how each of the tables associated with this data source were loaded. If I wanted to get rid of one of these tables, all I would have to do is click Delete here. And so then I can modify what fields are included by unchecking or checking these. So maybe I really want to include these fields. So I would check them, and then maybe I don't really need this cost index. So I'd uncheck that. And so then you can also change the table title, you can change the display name, and modify all these columns that define the data source fields. Now, a word of warning, changes to table names or a field display name or data type do not automatically propagate to the charts, links, copies, or any other project objects. So any charts and calculations, copies that use a table or field that has names that have been modified, these project objects will not be performed, and the charts will appear empty when the data is refreshed. So then at that time, you would have to rebuild the charts, links, etc. So again, now I have the option to either save over the existing data source or save this as a template. I am just going to save this. And then in order for these changes to take effect, I need to refresh the data. So I'm going to close the Manage Data Sources. And since I'm working with an ADV, I'm prompted to refresh the data. So I'm going to click Yes. So if you have added a field to a table that you now want to load into the project, you would again need to go to the data source editor. So first up in the Manage Data Sources dialog, and maybe I added a field to demographics. So I click Edit next to it, go to the Metadata tab, and then I need to refresh the data to add the field. So I get a notification that one field has been added and 0 has been removed, so I click OK. And the fields that are added will show up at the bottom. So I have added a dead indicator. So again, now I have the option to save over the existing data source, or I can save it as a template. I'm just going to save. And since this corresponds to a previously saved data source definition in the data source template library, I can overwrite that saved definition as well. If I did not, I'd have to save as and create a new data source definition. But I just want to save over it, so I click Yes. And then again, for the field to be added to the project, I need to refresh the data. So again, I would close, and since I'm working with an ADV, I am prompted to refresh the data. So I just need to click Yes for the data to be refreshed. So now the field that I've added is available for use in the demographic table. Now there may be times when you need to swap data sources. So for example, you cannot change a text data file source type to a database data source file type, or vice versa. What you need to do is first define a new data source and add it to the list of currently used data sources and remove the old one, then save the project and refresh the data. And when you define the new data source, you need to make sure that it's defined the same way as the original, because if you accidentally input a field as a wrong data type or spell a field differently than an original, any project objects created from these fields that were misdefined will not be created or performed, and charts will show up unconfigured after refreshing the data. So in order to make sure that you load it correctly, you can export the data schema of the project. And the data schema basically contains a record of the data, of all the data source definitions that are in your project and being used. So you click on the project node and select Export the data schema of this project. And you'll be exporting several Excel files. So I'm going to put in this new folder here and click Export. So then I'm going to go find the data schema. And I need to open the data source table fields spreadsheet. And so here you can see the data source is listed, the table, the original field name, if it's selected, meaning is it loaded into the project, the display name, the data type, the precision, the digit grouping, and the currency. And so this will give me a template of how I need to load these tables. So going back to my project, maybe I want to exchange the access data source for some Excel files. So I need to open the Manage Data Sources dialog, and you can see that I've already added the diagnosis table and the person summary as data sources, so I just have to add the charge detail. So I click New, and Next, 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 and it's right here, Open. And so this table has a few fields, so I want to go to my data schema export and see how I should load these. So I'm looking at charge detail. So I can see here that the account numbers are double and they're not grouped. And then the charges and total costs are doubled and they're loaded as currencies, and they're all selected. So I go back to my data wizard, and I don't want to group, or I do want to group these, but keep it as a currency and with 0 precision. Account number, I don't want to group the digits, and total cost is a double, and 0, and as currency. Next, next, and finish. And so now I need to add these new data sources to the project data source list. So charge detail, add, diagnosis, add, and person summary, add. And so now I need to remove the original data source. So I just uncheck it here. And then I close the Manage Data Sources, and again, I need to refresh the data. So now if I expand my data sources, you can see that the access data source has been removed and replaced with the charge detail, personal summary, and diagnosis. Now, as I mentioned before, any data sources that you define and save as templates are available across projects. So I'm just going to save this project and close it and open a new instance of Advisor. And I want to build a new project. So I click New, and then I need to go to the Project Workshop and expand the data source templates. And here are all my templates that I can, again, use in this next project I build. So in summary, the Advisor software allows you to define, modify, add, or delete data sources. And you can modify these data source definitions and all the tables and fields associated with that data source. And you can save data sources as templates to be used in other projects.